Hey everybody, welcome to Real Mob Stories. This is your host, James Proctor. Hope you're all having a great week. Today we have a couple of things I want to talk about. Over the weekend, I got an email from a viewer who thought John Pennisi was insensitive when he did a show over an elderly wise guy who was in solitary confinement and was accused of trying to take himself out. We're going to talk about that and give you the backstory of this interesting mob guy. Also, we'll go through John Pennisi's prison record that I have a copy of. You'll see some interesting things that paints a picture of how John Pennisi might have been suffering from his own issues while in prison. Finally, I have a list of guys in prison currently that I think should be considered for release. I'll give you my thoughts on the subject of balancing justice with compassion when it comes to these guys in prison. Please hit the like button and consider subscribing to Real Mob Stories with James Proctor. And without further delay, on to our feature presentation. I received an email over the weekend from a viewer who took issue with John Pennisi's show he did on alleged Sicilian mafia boss Bernardo Provenzano. Provenzano passed away in 2012, but Pennisi played a clip of Provenzano's wife and son visiting the ailing mafia boss in prison. This was in, I believe, 2008. He had went to prison in 2006, and he ended up dying in 2012. But this was in 2008. This particular clip that Pennisi played, and so on the clip they talk about how Provenzano was in solitary confinement, and they supposedly tried to take himself out by placing a plastic bag around his head. The viewer said in his email to me that he found it very insensitive that Pennisi speaks about an elderly man who may have contemplated taking himself out, and declares that those actions would be frowned upon by people living that lifestyle. You know, that old man may have been suffering dementia or Alzheimer's, or was very depressed. And we do know, I did some research, and the guy did suffer from Alzheimer's. And so Pennisi himself, according to this guy, was on antipsychotic medications and attempted taking his own life 7 years prior to his release. And so that piqued my interest, as I'd heard that Pennisi had some issues while in prison between 1990 and 2007. So we'll actually go through his prison record and show you the facts. I think that's the best way of how we can approach this. So Bernardo Provenzano, he actually died, like I said, in 2012. He was 83 years old, and he was known as the Tractor. And that was because of his ruthless trade of supposedly mowing people down. He was arrested in jail in 2006 after spending 43 years on the run. That's a long time, but you know, he was in Italy and Sicily mostly. So he had taken over the Sicilian mafia in 1993 after the arrest of Orena. And Provenzano was serving a life term for several murders. He was convicted of the 1992 murders of top anti-mafia judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. He was also suffering, while in prison, he was suffering from bladder cancer. He had serious cognitive impairment, and they believe he had Alzheimer's. And the last 2 years he had spent in a prison hospital ward. Also, you know, he was in solitary confinement, and you know, and that's one thing that I've noticed, that whenever guys are in solitary confinement for long periods of time, it does take a toll on mental health. So anyway, his illnesses had forced the suspension of ongoing negotiations with the state over other unresolved crimes. However, even before his health declined, he resisted any cooperation with the justice system. So he never cooperated at all. So Bernardo was born in 1933. He's from Corleone. He supposedly joined the mafia in his late teens after World War II. And he was a fast riser in the mafia ranks, and he was close to Orena. And he also worked for mafioso Luciano Liggio, who once said that Provenzano had the brains of a chicken, but shoots like an angel. So, I guess Luciano was, wasn't necessarily a big fan of him. But anyway, while in 1974, Liggio was jailed, then Orena was left in charge, and then he made Provenzano his underboss. And then when Orena got captured, then Provenzano reportedly tried to arbitrate these different rival mafia factions competing for business. And he's said to have steered away from attacks on high profile figures that had really affected the public opinion against the mafia and was causing, the police to respond harshly against the mafia. But then later years, they said he was extremely cautious about where he was at. He wouldn't even use a phone. So he only would do business and send messages through what they call Pizzini notes, and he would move between farmhouses every 2 or 3 nights. But that allowed him to survive on the run for 43 years. But then in April 2006, he was arrested at a farmhouse near Corleone, and the thing was, like I said, he earned the nickname the Tractor because, as an informant said, that the guy mowed people down. So he was definitely someone that you didn't want to, cross with. It said they committed his first murder in 1958 at age 25, when Provenzano is alleged to have been one of the gunmen who helped rising mafioso Luciano Liggio murder the Corleone clan head, Michele Navarra. So that's left Liggio as the head of the family. And then in 1963, Provenzano went on the run after an arrest warrant was issued against him for the murder of one of Navarra's men. And as we know, in the 1980s, gangland wars and murders of top judges became bloody hallmarks. And this was when Provenzano was the second in command, the underboss to Toto Orena. They said that he was a careful operator who took few overt risks. He mastered the crime empire's finances. And, they said in his leadership that the mafia became a less bloodthirsty, more efficient machine. And he was also known as the accountant because he was very good with managing money, and the mafia's rackets, the income coming from the rackets really increased during his time. But like I said, he was a guy that early on in his career was definitely very brutal, but then as he became boss, he became more careful. He didn't take a lot of risk. He understood that by going after judges and police, that was just going to bring more heat on the mafia. So, he eliminated that. So like I said, he went 43 years without, he was on the run, living between, farmhouses, and he would send messages. They'd have messages in rocks up in the mountains, and, just different places, but he had never use a telephone. So really an interesting guy, in my opinion. But, when he got convicted in 2006, he was almost 80 years old by that time. And he was already suffering from health issues. This so-called incident where he put a bag around his head, we don't know if that really happened. What we do know is that supposedly a guard took credit for saving the guy's life. He saw him with the bag on his head and I guess removed it, saved his life. But the guy was in solitary confinement pretty much this whole time up until the last 2 years of his life, when he was, in a medical prison. So that is the story of Bernardo Provenzano. And so now we'll go on to Pennisi'S record. It's kind of interesting, actually. So Okay, so this is his prison. This is John Pennisi'S prison record. The top part's just kind of the personal, his personal information when he was born and all that. He ended up spending his last few years at Fishkill, and we see here was convicted of two crimes. He had manslaughter, the first degree, and then criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree. And so the manslaughter was a Class B felony, while the possession of a weapon was a Class C. And then what you'll notice here at the bottom, they meant on this page, this is from 2001. It's showing that he definitely had medical problems. We go to slide 5. This is just talking about Pennisi'S, basically where he's at from his education standpoint. He took a lot of classes while in prison. You're seeing here he was in a 2-year college program, in 1991, and then it just mentions that he was in math and reading classes. And so these are his. These were, when you're in prison, especially in the federal system, you'll have be involved in different programs. Also, you have a job, where you get paid, and so we see here that the first two, he was a porter, and so he was in the lawn and ground shop, and apparently this was from 2000 to 2007, and then you'll see here at the end where he's getting, I think they're paying him so he's working Monday through Friday. You kind of have to read the code, but getting, looks like 13 cents an hour. He was in a shop aggression replacement training, so some sort of class on dealing with anger, and this was back in 1998. And it says here he is removed from the program for medical or psychiatric reasons. And then what I found interesting also was, and it looked like he tried to go in this program different, some of these programs different times, and then you're seeing here that he gets removed at inmates' request. I guess he was a group leader in the lawn and grounds from 96 to 2000. But, something happened where he ended up being removed at the inmate's request. And you'll see the same thing. Even before that, in 96, he was working in the chaplain services as an administrative clerk, and he was removed at inmates' request. And then what you see here, to get into the chaplain services program, you actually have to complete like a prerequisite to get in there. So typically they want people that are doing well in prison, that they're not violent, that they're not getting infractions, that type of thing. Because when you get infractions, these type of programs like working in chaplain services, that's a pretty that's considered kind of lucrative in the prison system. And and you see here he was making like 24 cents an hour. So yeah, I mean he did a lot of different jobs, from looks like a laundry operator for a while, group leader assistant for the laundry room. So again, in 93, it's showing that he was removed at inmates' request as the group leader assistant. So what it looks like has happened is whenever John Pennisi has got into some sort of what I would call like a situation where he has some authority maybe over other inmates, or he's working closely with staff, then something's happened where it didn't work out, and he gets removed. The next one is pretty much the same. Again, more of he was a group leader, gets removed at inmate's request. I'll make this whole document available made on the community page. And then this page here, that's just showing, and this is something that all inmates will have in their records. So it'll show you anytime that you're get transferred between facilities. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It can be, anything. You might have a court case, or you may have, sometimes there's special requests, like sometimes if there's a wedding or funeral, they'll let you go to that. You're typically be with the marshals. The marshals will help to make that happen. But, sometimes you'll have these transfers between different facilities. And that's all this is. So basically here from 12/26/1990, June of 2007. And then, I did want to point out the last part. So, that Pennisi talks about how, this guy, Provenzano, tried to take himself out. But, the one incident that we see on John Pennisi's record is that he was accused of self-harm back in 1999. And, that could mean anything. It looks like there was, I guess the resolution was some sort of counseling on that. But self-harm, that's obviously, infraction. And so either he, I don't know if he tried to take himself out or if he got angry and was, doing self-harm, hurting himself. But, obviously it got reported, and there was an incident on October 17th, 1999, and then they had the hearing a week later. So just wanted to point that out for you. What's on his record, just again, is just ironic that, he's talking about mental health and, these other guys having issues, and, he himself has had problems. So one of the things that I am passionate about is compassionate release. I've never, had any issues where, I've been put away or anything, thank God. But, at the same time, being in this genre, we have guys that get put away, for their crimes. And, when I go through the comments, when we talk about this, you kind of got two schools of thought. And what it is how do you balance this where, obviously you need to have justice. You commit a crime, you need to pay that price because, victims and victims' families suffer because of this. And a lot of these guys did horrible stuff. The people I think that we should be looking at for a compassionate release are all older mob guys. So I got four in particular. John Stanfa. So Stanfa's 83 years old. He got convicted back in the mid 90s. He was involved in that, the Philly War. He's been in for 29 years, and he's in a medical facility right now, medical prison, but I see no record of any request for compassionate release, and he's 83 years old. The second's Vic Orena. He's been in for 32 years, and yeah, he did a lot of bad crimes, but his compassionate release was denied. And then also Vic Amuso, the Lucchese boss. He's been in for 32 years as well. He's 89 years old. And I would say that probably Vic Amuso's the one with the worst record. He did some god-awful stuff with gas pipe Casso. Vic Orena, he's suffering from dementia. He at times he thinks that he's the warden. He's more into the Catholic faith and all of that. And, I don't think that he's any sort of danger. Vic Amuso, he's got a lot of health issues. Finally, Bobby Manna, we don't talk about him much, but that guy has been in prison, for 35 years. And he's 94 years old, and his compassionate release was denied. And I think that he's someone that should be given, the opportunity to get out. But, even those that are in prison, one of the concerns I have is with solitary confinement. I have concern with how the prison system deals with with any sort of medical issue. You know, we know what happened to John Gotti. He was pretty much in solitary confinement, you know, for over a decade. And, you know, he had cancer that, you know, could have, if he'd gotten the correct treatment early enough, he could have survived that. But he was sent to Springfield, Missouri, which I always say is where mobsters are sent to die. And then even recently, you have Ronnie Gialonzo. Ronnie G, he's got a growth that was on his lung, and he needed a special MRI, and they wouldn't do it. You know, he had to request that. I'm not sure where that's at. You know, they basically the only thing they would do was the X-ray, and the X-ray showed that there was a growth in his lung, but he needed an MRI to actually get more of a specific of what it is. But you know, that's still in progress. But and he's not in for really he's only in, I think, for 12 years, and most of it was more monetary related. You know, he upset the courts because he was flaunting his wealth, and so they're wanting to give it to him. But you know, the guy's got a growth on his lung, and he should be allowed to get the treatment and get the tests that are needed. So that's just my thoughts. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think it's ironic or insensitive that John Pennisi would say that people in that life would consider Provenzano weak? Do you think that the justice system does a bad job with dealing with mental illness? And what about the guys I mentioned that should be considered for compassionate release? Do you believe they should be, or should they just, you know, die in prison? So how do you balance justice with compassion when it comes to convicts that were put in prison for violent crime? I look forward to the discussion below. And until next time, take care, stay safe, and God bless you always.